I am no stranger to the Gigabyte Aero range. I've used the 15-inch RTX 27 model for almost a year now. The notebook is lightweight and powerful, but most of all it packs one of the best displays on the market thanks to its 4K OLED display. Gigabyte's newest Aero notebook now swaps out the RTX 2070 for an RTX 3070 and has replaced the 15-inch OLED panel with a 17-inch IPS panel. Unfortunately, even with the IPS panel, you're still looking at a pretty expensive notebook that packs an identical design to the last year's Aero. It also packs the same design as the Aorus 15G. The only difference here is Gigabyte Aero 17 includes a larger display. It is important to note that the Gigabyte Aero 17 comes in a range of models. This one is the RTX 3070 notebook with a Core i7 CPU. You can also find an even more powerful version that includes a Core i9 with an RTX 3080. Expect to pay quite a pretty penny for the entire range. This 3070 model retails for $49,999 and the 3080 model retails for $59,999 Rand. Sure, the Gigabyte Aero 17 is a pricey device and it can game and work, but that is a lot of cash for a notebook that shows very little innovation when it comes to design and features. The Aero 17 looks like your average black notebook and there's nothing really wrong with that. There's no over-the-top vents, exterior RGB, fancy grooves or anything of the sort. Gigabyte clearly wanted the performance of the Aero 17 to speak volumes and the design to be as simple and dare I say as boring as possible. To be honest, the Aero 17 looks exactly like last year's 15XA model. As I mentioned before, it also looks identical to the Aorus 17G except for swapping the logos. I can't fault Gigabyte here when it comes to the design because this device lives comfortably alongside other Aeros. I just hope they do something to their Aorus range to set it apart. On the outside there's a white LED Aero sign that lights up, and at the back you'll find an Aero steel slate that kinda acts like a car registration plate. There's a bit of carbon fiber flare on the top of the device, and underneath you'll find a bunch of vents. Inside we are greeted with a full keyboard that includes some nicely spaced keys. Each key is 15 by 15mm and the inclusion of a number pad will make users happy. There's also a small trackpad, power button and a webcam. The trackpad is quite disappointing to be honest. With a notebook this big that is aimed at productivity, you would think Gigabyte would do something to it. Instead we get the same trackpad size that you'll get on the 15-inch Aero notebook. The nice thing is though, it packs a fingerprint scanner. The webcam is still an issue. As I have mentioned in the past, it has a cool looking slider that can block and unlock the camera, but the position of the camera is extremely unflattering. It angles upwards and the direction shoots up towards your face. You'll be forced to look down to avoid it looking up your nostrils during Zoom meetings. There's nothing overly exciting about the Aero 17 by any means. The keyboard is RGB and chiclet, but also great to type on. Time travel is slightly higher than most notebooks, but it works fine. Really nothing fancy here. The display takes up some decent space and the bezels around it are thin. Speaking of thin, the overall size of this device is also sleek and far from bulky. Considering there's a 3070 in this, Gigabyte still managed to keep the dimensions down while making use of the same vents and cooling system from last year's device. Sure, the design is tired now, but it works. It isn't too heavy, it is sturdy and the black fits mostly with everything. The ports are positioned around the device both on the left and right hand side. Even though the Aero 17 packs an IPS panel, this is one of the best displays I've ever seen in a notebook. Not only is it a joy to work on thanks to its larger display, but the calibration is almost perfect. It goes without saying that the panel is 4K at a resolution of 3840 by 2160. It is a 60Hz panel, but thanks to this, the Nvidia RTX 3070 can take full advantage of this display. The Aero 17 also has display HDR 400 certification, which means this IPS panel can produce HDR brightness and colors. It also means that it can reach 400 nits of brightness, in which case it actually peaked at 530 nits during tests. Of course, 500 nits is still far off requirements to produce accurate HDR colors and brightness, but it is still impressive for a notebook. Even more so for an IPS panel inside of a notebook. This IPS panel also has an impressive viewing angle of 178 degrees. Some TVs can't even reach that type of quality. It also includes color coverage of 100%, a contrast ratio of 1200 to 1, and produces 99.9% RGB coverage and 99.6% Adobe RGB. When it comes to the performance of this Aero 17, it is a beastly machine. The cooling system also does a somewhat decent job keeping this notebook cool while under extreme stress, but don't expect it to be quiet because the Aero 17 is far from it. The device yet again uses the same 5-pipe cooling system with twin fans to keep the internals from overheating. There are also ample vents around the system to help exhaust the heat. It is the same cooling system in the Aorus 15G and Aero 15XA. The two large fans include over 70 fins, and that combined with the 5 copper pipes helps keep both the CPU and GPU cool during workloads and gaming. I ran a handful of tests during my review with the Gigabyte Aero 17 and got the following results. As you can see from these test results, the Gigabyte Aero 17 is quite a powerful device, and you can pretty much get away with 1440p 60fps across any modern game with ray tracing enabled. If you're diving into the 4K ray tracing spectrum, you'll suffer from a 30 to 40 FPS average depending on the game. Still, it makes the 17-inch 4K display well worth the investment when combined with the RTX 3070. Keep in mind that the display is capped at 60Hz, but the device does come with an HDMI 2.1 port, so you can always output it to a supported 4K 120Hz TV or monitor to boost this even more. During my test, the Gigabyte Aero 17 did get quite hot and peaked at 89 degrees Celsius on the CPU and 75 on the GPU. I also never suffered from any thermal throttling, so it seems the copper pipes and giant fans inside the notebook managed to keep things cool enough throughout my testing. As for battery life, it is okay. While working on 30% brightness and in battery saver mode, I managed to pump out over 4 hours of battery. You can easily get around 6 if you reduce the brightness even more. If you want a decent viewing experience at around 50 to 70%, expect 2 to 3 hours of battery life. And it should go without saying that in gaming mode, you'll need the power plugged in. Lastly, the speaker system is also fairly decent, but I've also heard a lot better before. It seems just like the cooling system and chassis, Gigabyte took the same speaker unit out of the Aorus 15G and 15XA and placed it into the 17-inch notebook. I did expect a bit more bass and deeper sounds from a device this big. Also, given its high price tag, I just kinda expected more. The Gigabyte Aero 17 is a fantastic 17-inch notebook, but it didn't blow me away. It is damn expensive for what you're getting here and isn't really innovative at all. Sure, it stays cool and powers most games, but for 50,000 Rand you would just expect a bit more wow factor, and this is actually just an Aorus 15G with a 17-inch display. Granted, the display is superb, but it still makes this notebook a tough sell. But that's going to be all our thoughts on the Gigabyte Aero 17. What do you guys think? Is this something you'd look to pick up? Let us know down below. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please consider liking and subscribing. And until next time, farewell.